Welcome to the second annual Unveiling Fashion Conference. My name is Lori Karcher, and I'm here representing the Textile Museum. This is a partnership between the DC Sustainable Fashion Collective and the museum that we've enjoyed now for 2 years. I'm coming from the education department of the museum, and if I can entice you to come visit us today, I might do that by sharing 2 things about us. One is that the Textile Museum is home to over 20,000 works of textile art from around the world. Our collection represents over 5 millennia of creative enterprises in the textile arts and covers 5 different continents around the world. We today are showing a special exhibition that's called Woven Interiors, Furnishing Medieval Egypt, which you'll get to see with our museum docents. The second thing I'd like to entice you with is that we're serving lunch there. For lunch and for tours. I'm thrilled to see you all here today as a manifestation of something we suspected might be true at the museum and maybe took a little too long to come around to ourselves. That sustainability and textiles is a topic not just worth exploring, but essential to talk about as often as we can. For the past 3 years or so, I've seen the enthusiasm for sustainable fashion really blossoming on campus, especially among the student population. Student organizations are creating events, actions, programs, and conversations all the time that are addressing sustainability, and fashion is really top of mind for them. A good example is just yesterday we had a very successful clothing swap at the museum, which was organized by Gabby Clarity and many of the student organizations on campus. So that was one example of many events and many more to come, demonstrating the interest in this topic. Thank you for joining this emerging community of enthusiastic people who want to make a difference in this area. In 2017, several members of the DC Sustainable Fashion Collective met each other through the programming around an exhibition at the Textile Museum. We were host to an exhibition called Scraps, Textiles, Fashion, and Creative Reuse, traveling to us from the Smithsonian Museum of Design, the Cooper Hewitt Museum of Design. And the friendships that emerged over this shared passion gave us the collective and our inaugural conference last year. Some of you may have been there and been excited to come back. This year we grew, so we needed to find a larger space. That's why we're here at the courtroom. But also we're here for another really fantastic opportunity. The other thing I hope you have a chance to see today is that down the hallway through the courtroom gallery is the exhibition Fast Fashion, Slow Art. And this is an exhibition curated by a GW faculty member, Bibiana Oliver, who is here in the front, and also Phyllis Rosensweet, a former curator from the Hirshhorn Museum. Fast Fashion, Slow Art scrutinizes today's garment industry. A diverse group of emerging and established contemporary artists and filmmakers explore issues of waste and consumerism through 11 films and video installations. This is organized by the Bowdoin College Museum of Art in Maine and in cooperation with the Corcoran School of Art and Design and the George Washington University Museum and the Textile Museum. So, some of you may have been able to preview it last night. If you haven't had a chance to see it, it will be open today in the gallery between 11 a.m. and 5 p.m. So thank you again for joining the conference today, and I hope I can speak to you at some point. Otherwise, I'll see you at the Textile Museum for lunch.
Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you all for being here. It's wonderful. It's bright. Well, it's not bright outside today, but you all are looking bright for a Saturday morning. My name is Megan Chapman. I'm the Sustainability Director here at George Washington University. And thank you, Lori, for the wonderful introduction for what's happening here in our arts programs. My job is really fun because I get to do things like walk around and pick up plastic I see on the ground because I know it's going to end up in the Potomac. Or make sure that our solar panels are actually connected to the building because sometimes they don't work. But I also get to work with students and very talented faculty and experts to help create thriving and healthy ecosystems for all. That is GW's vision for sustainability, and we see the university as a key player, a key institution in the grander scheme of how to create a more sustainable planet. And what I wanted to just convey to you today, that we are all about walking the talk. You'll notice that there's composting at the things that you're eating, where you're eating today. So just to plug that for you, you can, if you have any food waste, please put it in the bin. Be very careful about what you put in the bin. Don't put in any plastic, any metal, anything with foil or lining. So that means you can put in your plates, your cups, and your cutlery, and your waste food, and your napkins. But otherwise, be really careful about what you put in. But for us here today, this event is about walking the talk, and we want to recognize the DC Sustainable Fashion Collective for their ability to build collective, build community, and build dialogue. Because without a collective, we all feel a little isolated and a little alone. But the important thing to remember is that when we work together through a collective or through an institution, we can have a really big impact. I talk to our students and our faculty and frankly our staff about this all the time. I see each of us as being a change agent. So today you're here because you have some interest or curiosity, or perhaps you already have a passion for an issue. And I'd like you to keep that in mind all day. I'd also like you to take a moment to think about one action that you can take to affect the greater collective. It might be to change the mind of someone who doesn't think about sustainable fashion. It might be to help someone who needs clothing get clothing. It might be to change the experience of a worker. But something that you personally can do in your day-to-day, and it may feel like a drop in the bucket, but those drops do add up. So to that end, I'm going to put you in a little bit of an uncomfortable position for the morning time. If you could just turn to someone next to you or two people next to you, introduce yourself, and make a small commitment. Think of the one thing that you want to do. It can be very small or it can be big. If you could tell that to the person you're sitting near for just a few minutes, and then I'll just close up after that. Thank you so much for putting yourself out there. Just the level of energy in the room has elevated, I don't know, 10, 20, 100 times, so we're off to a good start. And I just wanted to lastly thank all of you for being here. If you weren't able to finish that conversation, find time to finish it later. Also wanted to thank Lori and John for the partnership that they are providing between the Textile Museum and the DC Sustainable Fashion Collective. I want to recognize Phoebe and Phyllis for your amazing work in the exhibit here. It has been inspiring for all of us. It will continue to be as the exhibit runs and for years going forward as we continue to talk about it and cherish our books that we have from you. And I'd also encourage you to ask them to sign your books. Could you raise your hand, Phoebe and Phyllis? I don't know if Danielle Nkojo is here yet, but if she is, and if she's not, that's fine. But I do hope you get a chance to meet her today, and I wanted to recognize her and thank her for helping to build community here in the DC, in the District of Columbia, around sustainable textiles in general. And most importantly, I'd like to recognize Joelle, Gabby, Kabiri, and Janice. If you could just raise your hand. Thanks for bringing us together and for continuing to build community around this topic. Without further ado, let's get the day started. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Good morning. My name is Gabrielle Clary, and I'm a co-founder of the DC Sustainable Fashion Collective, and I would like to welcome you to Unveiling Fashion Conference on behalf of the DC Sustainable Fashion Collective. That is a tongue twister. Sorry about that. So, since last year, we've become an official 501c3 nonprofit, and we've welcomed 3 new additions to the team. Danielle Nicojo, and Allie Gardner. We started a Campus Ambassador Program, which is a fairly new program that helps provide a platform for DC Metro students to join the sustainable fashion agenda. And on a larger scale, sustainable fashion is a word we can safely say in public. Last year it felt like Baltimore would appear, but now we see it in magazines, we see it being discussed at large platforms like Vogue, and designers are starting to acknowledge it, that it is a thing and that it is a problem. Well, not sustainable fashion, but fashion industry. Now we are here to discuss circular economy. That's the new buzzword. And we would like to discuss what it looks like in the fashion economy, what it looks like to reuse and utilize all your resources without going to landfill. But yeah, so I hope you enjoyed. We have a full schedule today, and coffee's ready. So take time out, get some coffee if you need to, and we're gonna start. Thank you.
Last intro before we get to the goods. My name is Amelia Ferrara. I am, as Gabby said, one of the newest members of the board of this collective. I want to thank Lori and Megan and Gabby for waking us up so nicely. I hear our coffee is now present, and we welcome you to get that when the moment is right. I want to take a moment to introduce our keynote speaker today, Elizabeth Cline. Elizabeth attended Syracuse University, where she earned her bachelor's in political philosophy. Only 4 years after graduating, she began her first role as a magazine editor, serving as an online assistant editor at Keynote magazine. A few years later, she was working as an online editor for AMC, the television network, where she got the chance to write about shows like Mad Men. She began freelancing, covering topics like sustainability, labor rights, technology, women's issues, gender politics, globalization, consumer culture, and textile waste. She's now been publishing articles on these topics for 15 years. These same topics open doors for speaking engagements, and in addition to being a presenter and keynote speaker at places like Parsons and MIT, she's been featured on MSNBC, NBC Nightly News, CBS Marketplace, the BBC, and New York Times videos. Then, in 2012, Penguin brilliantly offered her a book deal, and that book, called Overdressed: The Shockingly High Cost of Cheap Fashion, was a landmark expose on the hidden tolls of the fast fashion industry. It was translated into 7 languages. Avis Cardella, writing for the New York Times, calls her thesis in the book sobering, and called Elizabeth herself a persuasive advocate. Now we are so lucky that this year she has published her second book, The Conscious Closet, a revolutionary guide to looking good while doing good. It was just released barely a month ago, which makes it extra special that she's traveled with us to be here today. When she is not promoting her 2 books, you can find her at the New Fashion Initiative in New York, where she is interim editor-in-chief, or at Fashion Revolution USA, where she sits on the advisory council, or at Wearable Collections, a New York-based used clothing collection company, where she serves as the director of reuse. As a fellow author, I am deeply inspired by Elizabeth, with grandparents and great-grandparents who were laborers in the fashion industry. I am moved by her writing and her work. I can say on behalf of the entire collective, that what she is doing is really causing all of us here in Washington to quite roll up our sleeves. So please help me in giving the warmest welcome to our keynote speaker this morning.
An extensive meeting. I now realize I need to be better focused on it's really great to be in DC. First of all, I want to thank the DC Sustainable Fashion Collective for inviting me to speak. I know that you guys have put a lot of work into putting this conference together, so congratulations on a successful convening of people interested in sustainable and ethical fashion. And I'm really excited to have a chance to kick off the day and to share with you guys some of what I've been up to since I wrote Overdressed, which came out 7 years ago now. Let me make sure I know how to operate this. And just let me know if you can't hear me for some reason. I tend to talk fairly loudly, but just let me know. So in 2012, I wrote Overdressed. The shockingly high cost of cheap fashion. Now, it's almost difficult to imagine now, but at the time, people weren't really thinking about the impacts of the fashion industry. We weren't really sure what the consequences of switching from a seasonal model of selling clothes to a disposable model of selling clothes, what those impacts were going to look like. In my interest in this subject, as you kind of heard from the introduction, I wasn't working in the fashion industry. I was a journalist, I was writing about other topics. But my interest in the subject came from my own tumble into the world of bargaining, I guess you could say. If you've read Overdressed, you know that I was a bit of a fast fashion addict. Especially on my lunch breaks, I would slip over to Fifth Avenue in Manhattan and have a shop. And I would buy the cheapest clothes. And at some point, I turned around and looked at my closet, and I realized that I owned over 350 items of clothing. And I think that that's pretty shocking for someone who claimed to not have an interest in fashion. And the other thing that was really interesting to me about it is I knew probably the least amount, I had the least amount of knowledge of my clothing of anything that I bought. I think, it's easier than ever today to know a lot about the origins of your food, for example. And when it came to my closet, I just had no insight. I could not tell you anything about where my clothes were made, the impact on the planet that they were having, or what was really going on behind the scenes. So that's what motivated me to start writing about the subject of fast fashion. And so with Overdressed, I started to unveil a lot of the impacts that we now understand in much greater detail. Of course, lots of books and articles have come out since then, kind of further defining the problem of disposable consumerism. So what do we know now? Fashion is responsible for 8% of global carbon emissions. So any conversation about climate change has to include our clothing. We also know that clothing is a huge polluter of water. It's also a huge consumer of water. We also know that fashion is overly reliant on non-renewable resources, meaning fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are used on pesticides that go on our cotton. Fossil fuels are also used to make synthetics. A lot of people don't realize that fast fashion is, in fact, if it's synthetic, another form of single-use plastic. And fossil fuels are also used in the chemicals that dye and finish and turn our clothes into something we recognize as a textile that's soft and comfortable. Our fashion, our clothing habits have a huge impact on the environment, which we now understand in greater detail.
So 7 years, that's a long time. So let's talk about what's changed. First, the good news. Everyone in this room is part of a global conscious fashion revolution. That's really, really exciting. When Overdressed first came out, I would go to conferences or give talks, and it was the same 20 people in the room at a time. We were just talking to each other the whole time. So now I'm meeting people in the community every day who have just gotten into this, and they come from all walks of life. There are people from big brands, from small fashion startups. There are people interested in textile waste, in circularity, in farming. There are people who are just consumers who want to try and do a little bit better in the world. But the sustainable fashion revolution is now global, and I think that it's also becoming mainstream. We have huge brands talking about this now. I really could not have imagined that in 2012. I'm not sure if you guys saw, but there was a G7 fashion pact signed by I think over 150 major brands, where they're now working on science-based targets to reduce their carbon emissions. So that is really, really cool. So what hasn't changed? Unfortunately, the conditions that create disposable consumption have not changed. Clothing is still as cheap as it was when I wrote Overdressed in 2012. Now, pretty much everything in our society gets more expensive over time. And clothing is this sort of like exception, right? So you can look at retail prices overall have climbed moderately. Clothing prices pretty much have stayed the same. You can also look at how the price of everything from food to rent to childcare to school to medical care just continue to get more and more expensive. And clothes, they stay the same price. They're still cheap, and that's because, for the most part, even though we're having this amazing conversation about how to make fashion sustainable and ethical, for the most part, the fashion industry is still operating on a high volume model of disposable production based on low-wage work in other countries. That has not changed since Overdressed came out. So, in the pre-fast fashion era, so if you go back to the early 90s, we were still spending only like 3 or 4% of our income on clothes. So Americans spend a very, very small amount of our money on what we wear. The difference now in the fast fashion era is that we get a lot more clothing for that money. We've chosen to switch to this like high volume model of consumption. And recently, I thought it would be interesting to go back and see if, in fact, our consumption was maybe starting to go down. I honestly thought the answer would have been yes, because brick and mortar retail is in decline. A lot of people are switching to secondhand shopping. So I was hoping to see the numbers kind of going in the opposite direction, right? But they haven't. So in 1991, 39 items per person in the US, and now it's at 65 items per person. And we know globally consumption of clothing has doubled in the last 15 to 20 years as well. And I think when I wrote Overdressed, it was at 64 items, 7.5 pairs of shoes or something like that. So this isn't updated to reflect footwear, but the result is the same, which is that even though there's a wider consciousness about ethical and sustainable fashion, for the most part, this country is still consuming clothing disposably. So when we talk about circularity, I think it's really important to think about, look at the data. No one, in general, in this country is not operating in a circular fashion. So how do we get away from the disposable model that we're still so hooked on? I'm going to back this up. So, you might say, Elizabeth, isn't it good that our consumption of clothing isn't going up? In fact, I've seen articles try to make that argument. Like, we should be congratulating ourselves that our consumption has plateaued. But we have to remember how extreme our consumer behavior really is. It's estimated that in the world, about 100 billion garments are manufactured every year. I've seen the number go as high as 150, but let's take the conservative estimate that it's 100 billion. In the US, we consume 21 billion garments per year. That means our country, at 4% of the world's population, is consuming 1 out of every 5 garments on the planet. So when you think about those statistics, 8% of carbon emissions, world's leading polluter of industrial wastewater, a lot of that falls on the shoulders of our fashion companies and our consumers and our government and our nonprofits to figure out how to change the system. It really comes down to us. I also want to put these statistics in a little bit of a global context. On average, around the world, people still wear their clothes 200 times. So let's say that that average global citizen has 5 tops and 5 pairs of pants, and you wear all of those items 200 times. That can last you for 5 years. Let's contrast that to what's going on in the States. It's estimated that we wear our clothes a quarter of a week, the global average. But I think if you really look at the data, it's not that long. It's actually a lot shorter than that. If we know that we are consuming 21 million garments per year and 25 billion pounds are going into landfills every year, that means that the average piece of clothing in this country has a lifespan of 1 week. Now, I'll admit I don't have the hard consumer data to back that up, but my experience in the secondhand industry, which is what I've been researching for the last 4 to 5 years, backs up that theory. So, I know I don't have a lot of time with you guys, so I just want to tell you a little bit about what I've been doing since Overdressed came out. So in 2015, I started researching the secondhand industry, and I started writing about that subject in Overdressed, and I found it really fascinating, just this story of what happens to all the stuff that we get rid of. And this project has taken me all around the world. I went and interviewed secondhand traders in Nairobi, Kenya, where a lot of the secondhand clothing from the West ends up. And I started working with Wearable Collections, which is a used clothing collector in New York City. So this is me in a pile, I don't know, maybe like 500 to 1,000 pounds of used clothes in one of the Wearable Collections warehouses in Brooklyn. When I first started this project, I wasn't totally sure what I was looking for. I just kind of found it fascinating. And over time, what I became really obsessed with was what do we get rid of and why? Because once you start really looking at what people get rid of, you can sort of reverse engineer and extrapolate where we're going wrong. What is it that why is it that Americans are buying this way? And how can we really start to shift people's behavior away from disposable consumption? Another picture of the empire. So yeah, I've said this a bunch already, but we consume over 20 billion garments per year in this country. And barring the Great Recession, we've been doing that every year since 2005. So over time, over the last 15 years, that adds up to about 300 billion items of clothing, about the same weight as 370 Empire State Buildings. And most of that has just ended up either in the secondhand market or increasingly it's just going into landfills. So these are just some pictures I've taken around New York. Because at this point, people are so overwhelmed with how much stuff they have that they are just throwing it away. So all of this experience, I really think of it as experiencing the flip side of the fast fashion phenomenon. It's like I'm going into the world of waste, of, going into this world of clothing that has not been worn its entire useful life, and into this very wasteful paradigm that we've created for ourselves. And I have really, a lot of that information ended up informing the Conscious Closet. It deeply, deeply informs the Conscious Closet. If I had not had this experience of digging through garbage, the Conscious Closet would have never happened. But I think there were 3 really big takeaways for me from doing this research. And the first is something that I already knew and I had seen a statistic for, which is that most of what we get rid of can be worn again. That makes sense because we are buying way too much clothing for most of it to be worn until it's worn out, right? That makes sense. The second thing that I really discovered that kind of shocked me is when we talk about fast fashion, a lot of times we're very narrowly focused on brands that sell hyper-accelerated, trendy products. But what I've seen in my research is that it's not just fashion that people are consuming too much of. We're consuming too much of everything. Jeans, t-shirts, athletic wear, workwear. People are basically buying the same thing over and over and over again. And the good news about that is I think that it opens the door for us to shift consumer behavior. How can we figure out a way to better connect people with their clothes and help them care about what they're buying so they only buy something once and they buy it right, you know? It's harder to make that argument with fashion, but with basics, there's really no reason to buy 100 t-shirts, right? You should be buying a handful of good ones. Secondhand is actually not only a good sustainable strategy, it's a great way to build customer loyalty and to bring in conscious consumers. So as we move into the day, I'm trying to think what I want to leave you guys with. You know, this has been such a, I think, historic week. There have been climate change marches all around the world. This is a turning point. Young people understand, I think, much better than my generation, that the time is now to act, and the time is now to envision a more sustainable world. And I think that getting there, we all will agree with this, it's going to take the collaboration of a lot of different kinds of players. Brands have a part to play, the government has a part to play, individual citizens have a part to play. But we can't forget common sense solutions that are available to us right now, which is why even after all of these years after Overdressed came out, I really think the message for our country, if we want to make fashion sustainable, is to move away from the fast fashion model towards more sustainable, mindful, conscious consumption of clothes. Thank you.